Have there's nobody in the waiting room, right? Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Our webinar today is sponsored by the International Media Association for World Peace, IMAP. IMAP represents a worldwide professional network of journalists, and we support a socially responsible and moral media. It's an association of the Universal Peace Federation, UPF, which is an NGO in general consultative status with ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. UPF founders, Dr. Sung Myung Moon and Dr. Hak Jahan Moon, have dedicated their lives to fostering global harmony and understanding, and have tirelessly advocated for peace and reconciliation. IMAP produces a monthly webinar, and today's topic will be the Koreas in 2024, Prospects for Goodwill. We often hear about the hostilities between North and South Korea, but what about prospects for goodwill? In our webinar today, you're going to hear from two illustrious gentlemen with firsthand experience in the Koreas, Etienne Daoust and Michael Breen. Thank you both for joining us today as we go behind the headlines and look into the two Koreas. Our moderator today will be Ray Lipowcan. He's a producer at Pittsburgh Community Television in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where he produces programs highlighting Universal Peace Federation's domestic and international activities. He also produces shows of local interest, and these shows can be seen on his YouTube channel under Ray Lipowcan. And he's also a blue and gold officer with the United States Naval Academy, where he recruits and assists high school students in the Pittsburgh area with their applying to the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. Ray serves as the executive director for UPF in Western Pennsylvania. Welcome, Ray.
Well, thank you, Peggy, for the introduction, and welcome to all of our participants here today. As Peggy said, our topic today is the Koreas in 2024 Prospects for Goodwill. And especially here in the United States, most of the stories that come out are just of ballistic missiles and nuclear armament and such. And we're trying to take a lighter side to the Koreas today and hope that there's some glimmer of light that we can see between them for reconciliation. So it's a tough assignment for our two speakers today. I'm looking forward to hear what they have to say, but both of them have, I guess we could say the term boots on the ground. Michael Breen lives in Seoul, South Korea, and Etienne Daoust has been to North Korea on numerous occasions. So we'll have firsthand experiences from both of them. So first, we're going to listen to Mr. Daoust, and let me give you his bio. He's a holder of a master's degree in business administration from HEC Montreal, as well as a second master's degree in science, technology, and society from the University of Quebec in Montreal, with a thesis on the impacts of new technologies on North Korean society. Mr. Daoust specializes in North Korean society, having made 4 separate trips for a total of 36 days through the different regions of the country. He is one of the Quebecers with the greatest experience on site. I probably have to add to that, I'm sure, one of the greatest in North America. That's quite an accomplishment. His mandate as a researcher leads him as a speaker on North Korean issues, as well as on the news bulletin of Radio Canada and the TVA Group, which is a news channel in Canada. Well, welcome, Etienne.
Well, thank you. So, well, I like the fact that you started by saying that we only hear about nuclears and missiles, and that's pretty much it, because there's so much more to say about this country. So let me just share my screen with you. And let's start in presentation. Let's start in presentation. All right, so no mention about the title. I just told the one from UPF. I'm sorry. So let's make a very quick summary. Actually, what I don't like that we hear about a lot in the news is that feeling of instability regarding North Korea. and regarding all the enemy regime. If we go back about 20 years behind us, there was a table at six, the big sunshine policy, where six countries tried to decide what to do basically with the Korean situation. And those six countries were, of course, both Koreas, Russia, China, United States, and Japan. So this is table at six, and it's important to understand that into the eyes of North Korea, there is not much more people in the world that are interesting. That includes me as a Canadian, that includes pretty much all of Europe, Australia. It's not really countries that they have to deal with. Now, if we look at those six countries, basically there's two clans. So let's just take a Hollywood perspective about that. There is the good guys and the bad guys, and of course we are always on the good side, at least to our knowledge. So on the good side clan, there is of course USA, South Korea, and Japan. The bad guys, Russia, China, and North Korea. Now,
Excuse
quick
me,
summary.
Etienne. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I was just gonna mention that your slide hadn't moved. I didn't know if you had started. I'm sorry.
Because the punch was on the next slide. That's why. So the first question I have is, who is unstable? If we look over the last 10 years, DPRK, China, and Russia had the same leader. Kim is Kim, have always been Kim. South Korea, Japan, and USA, each one of them had three different leaders over the last 10 years. So it's always, say that, it's where the instability comes from. And we can see that the relation with North Korea have evolved a lot in the last few years. And according to me, a big part of the instability comes from South Korea and not North. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. That actually I can relate to the Canadian situation because here in Quebec, there's a separatist movement. And when you choose a political party that you want to vote from, there is not only the question of our right or our left, how much left or right on the political axis that you choose a party. There's also a second degree, which is, are you pro-separation or pro-Canadian unity? It's pretty much the same in South Korea. So there's different parties on the left-right axis, but there's also a let's say that, pro-confrontation with North Korea or pro-unification and peace with North Korea. And if we look at the last 10 years, actually the flavor of the South Korean government have pretty much decided what was going on. Unfortunately for 2024, we are with a government that is not pro-unification. It's more pro-confrontation. I mean, I leave that to the South Koreans about their choice of government, but that's important to know. It means that there is, on our side, on the good guys' side, well, there's no real opening about negotiation this year. So if we look specifically at the question of today's topic, 2024, there's no real opening on our side. Well, we have seen in the past, especially around 2018, there was a good opening on the South Korean side, and clearly opened also the discussion with the North. So now, if we look at the bad guys, Russia, China, and DPRK in 2024, let's face it, Russia right now needs soldiers to win the war in Ukraine. North Korea have plenty and needs money. I'm just predicting that North Korea might not only sell weapons to Russia, they might do more. And I do believe that. I'll come back with this later, but there's a lot of stories going around, like that top secret paper that came out of Germany last week, saying that Russia will be coming soon with 200,000 new soldiers. They need to find them somewhere. So I don't like that. It doesn't mean a conflict in Korea. China economy is not going so great. It's not the best time to have problem with USA and Europe. And let's face it, the relation with North Korea is not as dramatic as the near-war situation we have faced recently. Remember, in 2010, there was that island that is right at the border between North and South. There's been a military conflict with many people that have actually died, and there have not been any war. In 2015, two South Korean soldiers stepped on landmines while walking through the DMZ, Big conflict started at that point. I remember because I was in North Korea at that specific time. It was a lot of tensions, no war. And in 2017, we all remember when Donald Trump called the Rocket Man and sent a big naval force to Korean Peninsula and stuff like that. We don't see that really right now. We're not in a situation as bad as in those times. And those times, there've never really been a real war. It was near war, but there's never been a war. That's why also my friends in the tourism industry of North Korea, right now they expect the border that have been closed since early 2020 due to COVID. That it is still closed right now. It's opening next month for Russian tourism. Um, I'm not exactly sure of the situation with the Chinese tourism, but for the rest of Occidental tourism, like Canadian and European and Australian, it should reopen later this year. But as of this morning, the Pyongyang Marathon has been canceled, and that is mid-spring. So we're more looking at a spring opening for people coming next summer. But we're not in a situation right now where we believe that the border will stay closed. We're not in a very dramatic situation. And remember that in 2010, 2015, and 2017, tourism have never been canceled due to the tension. So there is a big margin right now, I believe, that we can go forward to. Now, if we want to know what will happen in 2024 with North Korea, the best way to do so is to read what North Korea said about that. The 14th Supreme People Assembly of the PRK, sorry, the 10th session, I'm losing, it's a mouthful, right? Just to read that. But basically, last week, Kim Jong-un did what pretty much any leader of any countries in the world are doing early in the year, which is to speak to his citizen and say what are the objective and strategy of the country for the upcoming year. As always, some international journalists read the paper and just pointed out the dramatic part where they said, well, they're always willing to do the war. If we look at the whole text, then the story becomes way different. And the first bullet point is really interesting, and that's where it comes from what Ray had said right at the beginning of the opening. 90% of the discourse was not about international relations. It was about economy and various improvement in life quality for the citizens of North Korea. Very long discourse. I'm pretty sure it was way over an hour. I just read the paper. I'm not sure how long it was, but it was obviously more than an hour. And 90% of that was about economy and improvement of life quality for citizens, like improving school, improving medical care. And it was actually very interesting to see how they acknowledge the fact that it's not to the level that the citizen deserve. The medical situation, the schooling situation are not as good as what North Koreans deserve to have, according to Kim Jong-un. That's what he said on TV. So that's interesting to know. Now, among the other 10%, of course, that was the international part where they're always ready to make war. Now, our media, or Occidental media, of course, just pointed out the very dramatic part. But here I chose a few others part that comes before, actually, in the whole discourse. First, being Kim Jong-un, reaffirmed that the strongest and absolute strength we are cultivating is not a means of preemptive attack for realizing unilateral reunification by force of arm. Explicitly speaking, we will never unilaterally unleash a war if the enemies do not provoke us. This is Kim Jong-un speaking last week. There is no reason to opt for war, and therefore there is no intention of unilaterally going to war. But once a war becomes a reality facing us, we will never try to avoid it, and we will take perfect and prompt action. We thoroughly prepare in order to defend our sovereignty, security of the people, and the right to existence. That is interesting. Of course, there is a blur part in all of it, which is once a war becomes a reality facing us. To me, this is a very blurred part. It's subject to interpretation. Where exactly it's really become a reality, I don't know. To me, this very specific part is blurred, but for the rest of it, it means that if Occidental countries, and most likely US and South Korea, doesn't bother too much North Korea, there shall not be a war. This is what Kim said. Still, what we see here, the monument behind here, I don't know if this is blocking the view, I'm sorry. This monument here, which is basically two people over a highway, this is the three charters for national reunification monument in North Korea. Anybody who have been to Pyongyang, well, pretty much everybody have been offered a chance to go up to the DMZ from Pyongyang. And this is the monument that goes over the highway, which is called the Reunification Highway, the highway that links Pyongyang to basically Seoul and DMZ and Panmunjom village. It's the Reunification Highway. And this monument that represents both Koreas is at the entry of Pyongyang. Meanwhile, last week, at the end of that discourse, Kim Jong-un said that they will destroy it this year because they no longer believe that a reunification is possible. So you might never see this actual monument if you have never been into that country. So that was also part of this discourse. So what to expect in 2024? Usually, the biggest moment of the year is when they make the biggest military tryout on the north that creates a lot of tension. In 2024, there is no round numbers around big birthdays. For example, in 2025, it will be 75 years since the beginning of the Korean War. It will be 80 years since the liberation from the Japanese occupation. I expect something big around those days. So by late June or mid-August 2025, something might happen because it will be a big round number and big festivities in Pyongyang. But there's nothing in 2024, so there is no specific date where we can expect to have something big to happen. Now, as I said earlier, South Korean government is not interested in making treaties with the North. This is what this government that have been democratically chosen by its population is willing to do as its own objective. So I don't expect anything on that side. But nobody is really interested in restarting the Korean War. Right now, the United States have a lot to do on his side. South Korea doesn't want to ruin its economy. China, neither does China. Russia has plenty on his sides too. So nobody is really interested in restarting the Korean War. And remember that Kim doesn't want to start a war on his side, according to himself. So personally, what I expect, the North will continue to use South Korea and USA military tests and other political situations like the US election to justify military tests and pressure, some kind of pressure with this. And basically, we can already predict the next missile test, maybe new nuclear tests, but it's only tests to add tension. I don't expect a war. Now, those missile tests have not really led to any major relation development in many years. And if we all know that, I'm pretty sure Kim Jong-un is also aware of that. The last missile test in 2023 never really led to any diplomatic evolution. So I expect on the other end that Kim will make evolution on his side, which is new kind of pressure. They're making big deals with Russia right now. I expect, for example, that they will claim out loud that they have a new kind of military technologies that they have acquired from Russia. They will want to put a different type of pressure, showing new kind of weapon or something like that. That I will expect that. So my last bullet is pretty much my conclusion for today. I don't really see any goodwill, but I don't really see war. Basically, I see a statu quo, but the statu quo means a lot of tension, no real conflict. So that's for me for today. I don't know if there's any questions.
Thank you, Etienne. That was incredibly insightful. Thank you so much. And I have to say it was a very well-balanced presentation. And the points you made about leadership changes, I think, is very relevant as well with Japan, the United States, and South Korea, because when new administrations come in, obviously they have a new direction and perspective. So that affects the dynamics. And also the comments you made as well about China and Russia. The dynamics of what's taking place within their own country, their own society, economically or militarily or whatever, also has some play in what is going on in North Korea or what might happen in North Korea. So, but I definitely liked your last bullet point: no goodwill, but no war. So there's always hope. And as you mentioned as well with Kim Jong-un in his speech at the assembly, he seems to be leaving doors open. At least he's showing that he's not, in some degree, being proactive to initiate any kind of military aggression. So, yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. And I also wanted to acknowledge we have some Canadian friends of the Universal Peace Federation who are viewing today. Appreciate you coming, Dr. Joseph Chung and Dr. Oh Kyung Pak. So thank you so much. They're in Montreal, Canada, and friends of the Universal Peace Federation, and they're on the call today. So thank you for joining us. Our next speaker is Michael Breen. And Michael is a consultant, author, and columnist, and he's the founding chairman and CEO of Insight Communication Consultants, public relations consultancy in Seoul, South Korea. He was a Seoul correspondent for the Washington Times and the Guardian, and he writes columns for the Korean newspapers and is the author of Kim Jong-il, North Korea's Dear Leader, and The New Koreans, The Story of a Nation. And those can, let me, if I may plug it for you, they can both be found on Amazon. If you'd like to research it, please do. And he's an honorary citizen of Seoul, South Korea. And I have to mention as well, Michael is coming to us live from Seoul, South Korea, where it's about 4:30 a.m. in the morning Wednesday. So, Michael, I don't know if you got up early or you just never went to bed last night, but thank you so much for being with us here today. You're muted yet.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah, I got up early, so you have to forgive me. Now it's either mental or technical problems that I had to switch to my phone. And are you able to upload my presentation? If not, then I'll just go ahead without it.
Put his presentation up.
I'm sorry. You want me to put the presentation?
Yes, he's
if you
unable
could,
to
yeah.
put it up. If you could.
Okay, give me a few seconds and you can start.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. And I appreciate Etienne. Etienne has actually made me feel a little bit better. I appreciate his presentation and his sort of positive view of things, because I'm about to give you the pessimistic angle, I'm afraid. So I hope you don't feel too depressed after this. Is it coming?
Yeah, it's coming up.
Okay. There we go. And do I need to ask you to move each slide along? Is that how it works? Could you
yes,
go
please let me know. Yes, let me know when you move to the next one. So
okay, thanks. Could you go to the next slide, please? There we go. So things are frankly not looking very good on the peace and unification front in Korea this year. In fact, we may need to brace ourselves for some serious tension and even a possible clash of some kind. And some people are even expecting war. That seems to be the perspective here. Here's a quote: situation on the Korean Peninsula is more dangerous than it's ever been before. This may sound overly dramatic, but we believe That's the author and two authors in this piece. That, like his grandfather in 1950, Kim Jong-un has made a strategic decision to go to war. This is actually Bob Carlin, who was the head of the State Department's Northeast Asia Division, Bureau of Intelligence. And you may know him. I know those of you who follow North Korea may be familiar with the James Church novels, the Inspector O novels. Well, he's the author of these. So he may be exercising his imagination a bit here, but I wouldn't normally quote somebody saying something like this, but it seems to be a bit quite consistent. For example, last week I was at a briefing by the president of the University of North Korean Studies in Seoul, and he said, I've been studying this for 35 years, and I wonder now if lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula is ever possible. Another figure, Robert Gallucci, who's a professor at Georgetown, who was a former special envoy, State Department special envoy on North Korea's nuclear issue back in the 90s. He said we should at least entertain the thought that nuclear war could break out in Northeast Asia in 2024. Now that's pretty extreme, but this is a bit of a flavor. I'm trying to give you a flavor of what people are saying in this country here, or how it's appearing to us. These are all things that appeared in the media here recently, and not conservative media. That last quote was actually in the Hangare, which is an opposition media, what you might call, it's not really liberal, but what you might call liberal media. Could I have the next slide, please? So what I'd really like to talk about, I'd like to sort of delve into this kind of pessimistic analysis. I think it comes from three places. One is the uncertain global environment. You know, we have worsening US-China relations, wars in Ukraine and Israel, and this is at a time when I would note that we in the democratic world seem to have lost a certain measure of confidence in our own values and the willingness to defend them. You see a lot of people withholding criticism that we used to give freely of non-democratic countries, saying, well, you know, we're not so good ourselves, are we? And this seems to be resulting in a strengthening of authoritarianism and militaristic tendencies. The other two reasons concern North Korea's changed attitude to reconciliation with South Korea, and as Etienne was talking about, South Korea's own policies, its own attitude, the government's own attitude and response to this change. So let's look more closely at these last two. I'd like to sort of bring it down to the Korean Peninsula. Could I have the next slide, please? So Kim Jong-un declared this month, last month and this month, that he's no longer interested in unification. He sounded quite serious. We shouldn't assume that we know his mind, but we should assume that by saying this, by taking this option, it was after long consideration of other options. In other words, it's not just a random interpretation of a random comment. It's a deliberate statement. And what he said was, I believe it's a mistake that we must no longer make to deal with the people who declare, in other words, he's talking about the South Koreans, to deal with people who declare us as the main enemy and seek only opportunities for our regime collapse and unification by absorption. He said, it's time for us to acknowledge the reality and clarify our relationship with the South. North Korea has to, quote, completely eliminate such concepts as reunification, reconciliation, and fellow countrymen from the national history of our republic.
When I clean up, I'll take care.
Sure.
Yeah.
Next
Coming
slide,
into a
please.
mess. Not a problem.
Sure.
Please mute yourself, whoever's talking.
Not me, I guess. Okay. To show that he meant business, that he was serious, Kim this month ordered, actually last month, I beg your pardon, organizations dealing with unification to be closed, and he instructed the removal of past symbols of inter-Korean reconciliation, including a cross-border railroad section. And this, I see Etienne had this same image, this unification monument in Pyongyang, which his father, Kim Jong-il, built. He's ordered it to be removed. And he described it as an eyesore, which frankly, it is, I think. That was quite oppressive. But so we need to see if he follows through on it. If he follows through on this, then there's good reason to take him seriously. Next slide, please. So how important is what I've just described him as having said? Politics is about the use of power, and it's expressed in rhetoric and symbols and ceremony that doesn't always mean what it seems to. So we need to ask ourselves, is this a big deal, or is he trying to do something else, like signal to South Korea that he wants more compliance or something else? So in one sense, I would say Kim Jong-un appeared to be simply accepting reality in giving up on unification. After all, the Koreans have been talking about, on both sides, about unification for 80 years now and achieved nothing. They used to blame foreign powers for preventing them from coming together. But it's been very clear for a long time that the truth all along was that the Koreans themselves, and I'm talking about North Koreans and South Koreans collectively, were not doing it because they didn't want to. Or I should say, what each side wanted and meant by the word unification was the absorption of the other side. And that hasn't been possible, hence the lack of progress. It's tempting for us in South Korea to reject the anti-unification or apparent anti-unification stance as just a posture. To us, it seems like there's no way that this regime that runs the state like a massive military base is going to change the narrative that's justified that from the start. It's just ideology, some people say. But ideology is important, especially in a generational dynasty. Neither North nor South Korea has ever said before that unification is not possible and not desirable. They've proposed it in different ways, but their commitment to unification is enshrined in the constitution of both parties and in the charter of the ruling Korean Workers' Party in North Korea. So changing this, and Kim has actually said that the constitution should be changed. Changing this in North Korea is a big deal, and we need to take it seriously. Can I have the next slide, please? So how should we, if we take it seriously, how should we interpret it? Kim has not said, if we look at his speech, he's not said that South Korea doesn't belong to him or doesn't belong to North Korea. This month, as I mentioned, he called for a constitutional revision. He said, in my opinion, we can specify in our constitution the issue of completely occupying, subjugating, and reclaiming the ROK and annex it as part of the territory of our republic in case of war breaks out on the Korean Peninsula. So that sounds like the normal policy of unification on North Korean terms. If we were talking about, say, North Korea and China, or North Korea and Russia, or North Korea and Japan, he would not be interested in subjugating and reclaiming those countries for himself. he'd fight a war, and if he won, go in and get out again once he'd got the terms that he wanted. So, but the unusual part of this statement is his use of the word ROK, the description of South Korea, the Republic of Korea, and this is new. The two Koreas, as you know well, they don't recognize one another, and that's why each country refers to itself as Korea, and then to the other side as North Korea or as South Korea, i.e. a sort of an illegitimately or rebel-held other part of the country that rightfully belongs to us. But this time he's calling it by his official name, and he's calling it another country. So why is this? Next slide, please. Okay, can I go back to the previous slide? Thank you. So if we look at the small print of what's coming out of Pyongyang, although it's not really a really small print, we can see now that they're talking about invading these are the terms being used, invading the Republic Korea as a hostile foreign power. The underlying intent to take over South Korea has always been there, but the motivation or the language used that keeps people, the North Koreans, on board with this has been to liberate their compatriots. And it's words like this that Kim is proposing to change. The new terminology allows them, by positioning South Koreans as hostile foreigners, it allows them to get rid of them. In other words, I would say there's a dehumanizing intent. And this sort of dehumanizing always precedes war. And this is why people are worried here. One reason, for example, that so many people around the world are upset about the bombing of Gaza is that despite the awful atrocities committed by Hamas, the Palestinians have not been dehumanized in the eyes of the global community. We see people suffering, but often, usually in warfare, the other side becomes dehumanized. And so even though you're raining bombs down on them, people don't seem to care so much. Is that what's happening now? So it may be too early to make full sense of this change in North Korea. But I think one thing we can see is that Kim Jong-un is addressing two audiences. One is us, i.e. the South Koreans and its allies. And the message to us that we're getting is that Kim is willing to attack us with nuclear weapons if needs be, hence the nervousness. The other audience is the North Korean elite and the North Korean people. And what Kim is doing with them is, in a way, getting rid of the contradiction of the previous position. The previous position is, North Korea's position has been quite contradictory. It's that South Korea is evil and we can't deal with them. And if you try to on your own, you risk imprisonment or execution. And yet, at the same time, they're our compatriots and we want to unite with them and rebuild our national identity with them. So Kim is now making South Koreans, he's positioning them as foreigners so that North Koreans feel as much cultural distance from them as possible. Next slide, please. So the third issue we need to, reason for pessimism, and this is something that Etienne touched on, is the changed position in South Korea. President Yoon Suk-yeol's policy is an anything but moon policy. That means anything but the failed reconciliation efforts of the previous government of Moon Jae-in. 15 years ago, the president at that time, Lee Myung-bak, similarly reacted to his predecessors' failed efforts and was not bothered about dealing with North Korea. his posture and the way I would interpret South Korean posture here is not so much anti-unification as Etienne said. It's kind of, yeah, we're always up for talks about unification, anytime, any place, we're fine, but don't waste our time. There's a kind of a cynicism about North Korea's sincerity based on what's just happened previously. 15 years ago, however, that posture on this side of the DMZ led to a military clash. And at that time, the rules of engagement, in other words, the rules by which the military responds, prevented the South Korean army from retaliating quickly. But those rules of engagement have changed. The South has been stepping up its surveillance and reconnaissance capabilities to better counter North Korea's nuclear program. And Yoon, the president, has promised, quote, if there are any provocations, the punishment will be several times stronger. His defense minister, Shin Won-sik, echoed this sentiment in a radio interview recently. He said, and this sounds almost like a North Korean, he said, a barking dog doesn't bite, i.e. Kim Jong-un is barking. If North Korea makes the wrong decision, it will come to an end in the shortest of times. I would say that with this kind of strong talk, you can understand the sentiment, but for a democracy to talk like this, it's playing with fire, basically. And it creates a situation where if there's any misunderstanding, it could rapidly lead to miscalculation and even conflict. The analysts here, I mean, I'm not a military analyst by any means, but the analysts here are predicting the highest risk as between March and August, when the US and South Korea hold military exercises, which is something that North Koreans always find threatening. And then the last slide, please. Could I have the last slide, please? No? Okay. Actually, it's just a slide that says thank you. There may be some silver linings here, but the only reason for optimism that I can find at the moment is that my own forecasts in this regard are usually wrong. But frankly, I'm very, very pessimistic. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Yeah, I have to say that you said that your presentation was going to be pessimistic, but I have to say I would call it realistic. I think it was very realistic. And EJ, can we get Etienne on the screen as well? And yeah, thank you to both of you. And I have to say those were two excellent presentations, and it really shows you're both exceptional journalists, because it was both just very fair, balanced, and unbiased. And that's what we want to see in journalism. And that's what we're trying to promote at the International Media Association for Peace. So thank you so much. So perhaps we can continue the dialogue with some questions. And for either of you to answer, there's a couple of different thoughts as far as solving the problems of the Koreas. And one thought is that the Koreans have to take care of this themselves without outside interference. And the other thought is that they really need help from the outside. So what are your opinions? Is this something the Koreans need to do by themselves, or should others intervene and offer their assistance?
Well, I can answer about this. Actually, while Michael was speaking, I just realized I have a few books by me right now that I got in Pyongyang. So it's always interesting to see what is their point of view. This one here is in French, but basically they're stating the three principles for reunification according to North Korea, and they comes from Kim Il-sung, so the first of the three Kim. And basically, they want the reunification to be independent, to be pacific, and to be a great national unification. So it does mean that for them, and actually there's more details after that, but basically what they're saying is that they don't want outsiders into this situation. According to them, Korea have been separated, but not without the agreement of any Korean. Back in those days, back in 1945, no Koreans wanted the separation. It's only outsiders that have created the separation. So now they want a country for the good of all the Koreans without outside interference and in a way that will please everybody. That's the official discourse that comes from Kim Il-sung. Now you may say that, yeah, well, sounds like things have changed, but that is the what is interesting is that this kind of discourse is what they teach in class to young kids from decades and decades and decades. So even if suddenly they're starting to say that, yeah, but maybe not so much about reunification anymore, well, the population will not forget what they have been taught for decades and decades and decades. And this is the basic principle. They want it for all the Koreans without outsiders, basically.
Right. Thank you, Etienne. Michael, any thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
Yeah, I know. I agree with what Etienne said. This is really something for the Koreans to do. I remember something I'm fond of quoting. I remember many years ago when the Germany's reunited. There was a press meeting here in Seoul with the ambassador of West Germany at that time, and he was asked by a Korean journalist, "Do you think the Koreas could reunite like you did?" And the questioner was really asking, "Will the foreign powers allow us to unite?" Because the view I'd say up until 20 years ago, the view, at least among the South Koreans, the popular view was that Korea wasn't united because foreign countries prevented it. And the ambassador's response was, we Germans, we were divided because of our sin. He used the word sin in English. And we needed the approval of the powers, the foreign powers around, particularly the Russians, the British, the French, before we could unify. But you Koreans were divided because of your innocence. In other words, your political weakness. He didn't say that. That's what I'm saying. Your innocence. Therefore, nobody can get in the way of it. So some countries might not want the Koreans to unify, but no country can take a position against it. So I think, to your question, it would be, could obviously some countries are very involved. America particularly is obviously very involved because it has troops here. But this is the reconciliation, unification is up to the Koreans. But could foreign powers help? Yes. Because these two sides don't talk to each other very well. They just don't trust one another. I mean, what I have given you, the view from South Korea, may be a complete misreading. We just don't trust them at all. So if third parties stepped in to bring us together, bring the two sides together, there is a role for that. But frankly, I can't see anything really happening until there's some kind of regime change in North Korea. And I think no one's going to impose that on them. That's got to happen up there. I don't see this regime as capable of reconciling with South Korea.
Somewhat of a follow-up on that question by Keith McCarthy was the generational differences in South Korea. In other words, probably 30 or 40 years ago, we could say our generation or the older generation now probably wanted unification because a lot of them were or still are refugees from the North, and they still have families there. But now we hear stories of the younger generation who were very economically successful and realize that unification is they're going to have to give a lot up. So what kind of influence do you think that generational gap or difference has in helping with reconciliation or not?
Shall I go?
Yeah, go.
Yeah. I would say that's right. The younger generation show far less interest in North Korea. They're rather contemptuous of North Korea. Not that interested in unification. I wouldn't just say it's purely selfish sort of economic thing. It's more they're not so convinced it's sort of the in the desirability of it for the nation. But that sentiment is not expressed in politics yet. So no. This is why what Kim Jong-un has said this month is so kind of shocking to everybody, and I'm waiting for the reaction, so the slow political the reaction in terms of politics here, because no political party here has ever taken an anti-unification stance. When we say a president or a party is anti-unification here, what we're really saying is no, they're pro-unification, but they can't be bothered to talk. In other words, they're against sort of making the effort. But what I'm saying is, so far, no South Korean politician, let alone party, formally opposes unification. So I suspect that if circumstances changed and we had a unification moment, a potential for reconciliation, all those young people who right now say they're not interested would suddenly get interested. That's what I think.
I believe in a very similar way. In the South, basically, the younger generation right now don't see what's in it for them because they don't have that historical link with that population. If their great grandfather or uncle is over there, well, they've never seen the guy, they don't really relate to him. But maybe there's a way to see it in a much more positive way, and ultimately it becomes a marketing issue. But if Korea was unified and all 75 millions of Koreans were as productive as the 50 millions in the South are, Korea will be even way more powerful nation throughout the world. I mean, of course, it's frightening because the economic gap for reunification is huge in a scenario where it's the South that basically eat the North. That's huge. That's impressive, and people are afraid of being rude by that. It's easy to compare with the Germany reunification, but GDP per capita during the German reunification was about 4-1, right? So the West were about 4 times more rich than the East. Now, if we look with the Korean, basically the Korean border is where two countries have the biggest gap in economy in the world. Second biggest one, of course, being with Haiti and Dominican Republic. But the first one is the Korean border, and it's a matter of about 35-1, the difference between GDP per capita. So it's way more difficult than the German reunification. I believe that's why it's frightening. But if there was a way, then after that, you can see the upcoming. I mean, once you pass through that big bump, then unified Korea will be extremely powerful, and that will be something that they will be extremely proud of.
Thank you, Etienne. At this time, I'd like to invite up our chairman of the Universal Peace Federation for North America, Dr. Michael Jenkins. Welcome, Dr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Ray, and Michael, Breen, and Etienne. A very, very excellent program. We are really in a constant effort to try to understand the way to peace with North and South Korea. So I think your realistic assessments are very true. Our advisors and experts that work with the Washington Brief also agree that the announcement made at the end of the last year by Kim Jong-un was very, very remarkable, and not just another threat or just another expression of new ideas. It's quite serious. So I really thank you for that, and we do hold that we have to keep trying, but we should be aware. I think that the danger is great, and hopefully your work will help people understand, and our diplomatic teams will understand how to keep going, how to keep the dialogue going. We're really appreciative of Ambassador Joe Detrani, who was in the six-party talks, but he's very realistic also. He's not dreamy at all, but we'll all keep trying. We certainly don't want to see war. And but thank you for the excellent discussion. Thank you, Ray, and thank you to our Canadian colleagues, Dr. Famularo and everybody. What a wonderful program. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Well, unfortunately, we've somewhat run out of time. If I can ask both of you, if you can just give perhaps a minute or so concluding comment. If you have any just concluding comments for today, just to wrap it up.
Yeah, well, what I would say is I gave a very pessimistic outlook, and that's the way that people on both sides of the political aisle are feeling right now. We're trying to digest what's happened. The big concern is that there will be miscalculation. The North Koreans, for example, both sides view military exercises as a threat. When you are doing a military exercise yourself, you view it as an exercise. But when you do it close to the border of a country that you have problems with, it's interpreted in a different way. The last time we had a serious clash was when those exercises came too close to the North Korean border. The North Koreans warned, then reacted, and we were shocked. So this time, the retaliation by the South Korean side, they've promised, will be severe and strong. So that could make things worse. But we've been here before. And frankly, what I feel like at the beginning of every year like this is I kind of am waiting for the unexpected event. I don't see a gradual creep towards reconciliation. I think there needs to be some surprise, something that takes us by surprise. And Kim Jong-un has taken us by surprise this time. It seems to be in a negative direction, but let's hope there's some other pleasant surprise around the corner. That's all I can say. It sounds a bit fanciful, but I'm trying to make the best of a bad situation right now.
As for me, I do see that between peace and war, there is something in between, and that's where we are right now. We cannot say we're at peace. We cannot say we're at war right now. Even though there's been no peace treaty, but there's been at least an end of the hostility. That was in 1953. Now, besides that, there is a big event in front of us, and is that in about a year, there might be a new US president. Now, that may change the global situation. Of course, I still believe that the two key players are the two Koreas, but still, that will add something to the equation. So, if there is a new president in the United States, there might be a different flavor, but still, that will happen in 2025. So, if we stick with the today's subject, which is 2024, that's why I believe we're going to stay into this in-between situation. No goodwill, but no war.
Well, thank you to both of you for sharing your perspectives on the Koreas today. And thank you to all the participants joined us on Facebook, Zoom, and YouTube. And just so everyone knows, we do these UPF webinars every Tuesday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Please check out our website, us.upf.org, and you can get a link there for these programs. So thank you to everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.